How do we start?
Maybe everyone can say where they are and what they're doing right now, like to get a little bit of a right now context, because we already read a little bit about the others, about like the bigger context. But I think for starting conversation, it's always to know, like, good to know in what kind of headspace or physical space someone is.
Sounds like a good idea.
When you say ecology, people think about environmentalism, which is not, for me, it's not the same at all. Like when I talk about ecology, I often talk about interrelationship, about how to like include everything around us as part of something creative and not being the human-centered. So and to really work in a different ecosystem. So that's what I try to do now in directing, but that was how I worked in scenography for a while now. And it also put me a bit out of the industry, because there's some project that I was like, I don't think it makes sense for me. And or really propose different ways and try also to modify the way we produce theater.
Great. What is scenography? I think it's really interesting to start with that question because it's such a contested term. In academia, we talk about scenography in so many different ways, and actually Pamela Howard wrote a book on what is scenography, and then she starts her book by asking the question to many different practitioners and scholars, what is scenography to them? And there are many different answers to that question. So I don't think we have a definitive definition, so to speak, of what scenography is. So there's the classical definition that I think most people talk about, which is that intersection of light and color and movement and sound and spatial design. And then I guess there is scenography in the terms of what not scenography is per se, but what scenography does. And that's what I'm interested in, because I think the question is shifting. We were very, I guess academically, we were very concerned about defining scenography for a long time, particularly in the early 2000s. And then I think the conversation in the last couple of years has shifted into, all right, let's not try to define it. What we're interested in is what it does. What is the political and ecological and social potential of scenography? And I think that shift has come about because we used to talk about scenography being something that purely happens in the theatre, you know, in theatre buildings, in more conventional contexts. But in recent years, that dialogue has shifted to acknowledging that scenography can also be an expanded term, and expanded scenography is really looking at how the scene, how visual spatial interpretation can happen outside of the theatre. And there's been a number of books that have now acknowledged this kind of movement of expanded scenography, shifting the dialogue from in the theatre to outside the theatre. And I for me, expanded scenography is very simply theatre design or performance design that has left the building. And I don't just mean that in a literal sense, I also mean that in a sort of symbolic sense, has left the building those conventions around the building and what theatre design means within the building context. And expanded scenography is where it's left the building and intersects with daily life. So there's this kind of movement in scenography being something that happens on the street, scenography being something that happens as part of political campaigning. Scenography is seen in shop front windows. It's everywhere. It's a lens through which to see the world in a performative, visual, spatial way. Yeah.
There was a time when I was thinking a lot about ecology, and I thought also about environmentalism and how I need to how I need to be responsible for the materials that I use, and also the people that I work with, and myself and the project. So I was thinking a lot about this responsibility that comes with trying to make ecological art, in that sense meaning environmentalist art. And there's quite of a pressure when you see ecological scenography as trying to be as environmental friendly as possible, because you still need to also commit to your own project. So there is a sense of splitting yourself. You want to make a project that is as good as you can make it, and at the same time you don't want to pollute the world more. So I was very busy with this paradox and how to resolve this, and until I read Arne Næss. He has written about deep ecology. He was a Norwegian philosopher, and he wrote about the way that I understood it. It's about de-hierarchizing the network of living beings and possibilities, everything, so that it becomes more of a rhizome that is just interconnected, and my art project and myself and my material, they are just one node in this huge rhizome. So when I started thinking about ecology in that sense, it was easier to kind of find a stretch, because all of a sudden it was not a bipolar thing with yes or no, or black and white, and environmental friendly, environmental unfriendly. But all of a sudden it was, okay, I have different options to choose from. And if I want to make a project, I need to commit to that. But how can I? It was more about the question, how can I do something, and less about the question, if I can do something. And that was, I think that really helps in these kind of situations.
So normally what I do when I work for a more conventional theatre company is, the first thing that I do is I will go and see the theatre company before I even start to design. So I will go and have a look at the theatre space, like in situ, so that I can actually understand the space. Then I will go and I will ask the theatre company, can you please take me to the storage rooms, the props rooms, everything that you have already as part of the theatre company. So most theatre companies, they do have storage rooms where they keep things, and I will go and I will look at everything. And I might even take some photos of what's around. And then I might also talk to the technical team and find out what other productions might be happening, what kind of suppliers they have. So I'll definitely start like that, even before I have a concrete idea of what I'm designing. And I'll also walk around the theatre and try to understand the location of where the theatre is, what kind of communities are around there.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a school that's down the road from the theatre company that I think, okay, that's interesting. There's a school there that could be useful. When I'm thinking about creating a design that then could maybe, after the production, it could be donated somewhere, or if I want to involve the school in maybe an educational program around the theatre. A lot of theatres have connections with those schools already. What are the social economic conditions of where we're at? How does that play into what we're creating? And in a more expanded context, in a project that I did in New York, the Living Stage project in New York, I literally went and found objects and materials on the side of the road that were 20 steps away from the performance space, or 10-minute walk away from the performance space. And I went to flea markets that were around the corner, and I spoke to residents and asked them if they had any materials that they wanted to donate. So that was literally place-based. So where I have more ability, I think in an expanded context, I can really be very responsive to place.
What is the relationship of the spectator to the piece, to the performer? Is there a performer? How long does the whole thing take? Is it 2 seconds or is it 2 years? It depends all on the project, and creating is also a kind of control, because that's how you give it a specific shape. So I think ecology in this kind of control that you say is a lot about zooming out and looking at the piece from afar. What is before the project? What is after the project? One thing that has been important to me, because I don't necessarily make works in a theater space, is the beginning and the ending, and not in a way that you necessarily would notice. Now it starts, now it's over. Because in theater spaces, if you enter, there's a bar, and then you go into the theater. So there's also always this kind of tunnel that you go through, but it's always part of the experience, and it's also a kind of safe space where you can just readjust to reality. Maybe it's a piece that really shakes you inside, and then you need some time alone. You can go to the toilet, you can have a beer, you can talk to your friends, or just be in this kind of in-between space. And ecology and also expanded scenography I see as kind of taking also this time and space into consideration. It's part of the piece. If you, for example, in my last piece, it was a very short performance, just a couple of minutes, and there was one spectator. And when a piece is this short, it becomes even more important how the spectator settles into the piece. What is the road into the piece? What is the dramaturgy of the introduction, even though it's not maybe formally seen as an introduction? And in this case, it was the piece itself was quite intense. It was completely in darkness, and you could only see a couple of scenes because there were just a little bit of light, and it was about the connection between the spectator and the performer, and how the spectator is physically responding to the performance. So it was actually also a research piece. But before the spectator went into this completely dark room, there was another space where they could kind of read a short letter, which was to the spectator, to tell them, okay, this is going to happen, and please take your shoes off. You can leave your things here, and get acquainted to the material that you will use in the performance space. And then after the performance, they would go back into this kind of in-between space, but on the other side, on the other side. So there was a wall between the entrance and the kind of reflection space. And there they can take their own time to come back. Maybe it was because a couple of minutes go very fast. Maybe it was a kind of a shock. And then if you go out of this kind of shock state into the other exhibition spaces, you might be very disorientated. And I think this is very important to take into consideration when you create these kind of works on site, that there is something after and there is something before, and there's a real person experiencing these things. You don't know how react, what they will think of it. Maybe it triggers something in them. There's of course all kinds of ethical warning or trigger warning or these kind of things, but you never know how a person will respond to what you show. Maybe it's a very triggering piece for one person out of 1,000. So I think the control is also there cannot be complete control, but when we guide spectators, always try to, or for me it's very important to always try to take into consideration that the spectator can also gently choose themselves, even though I propose something, and then they can take it or leave it. Does that make sense?
Totally. A small question about this: does it affect, like, does the spectator affect the performance or the scenography or the work you're creating in this ecological thinking?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's also, it always affects the performance, even though maybe sometimes it's not considered or it's not noticed, but it always affects. With the tree house, with the tree platform, it was very obvious because I invited people to come up. So then the spectator becomes the performer when they're on the tree with me, because everyone will look at them, and then it completely changes. And I designed it in a way that I would give space to the spectator to kind of shape the performance as well. I wouldn't say, okay, now we do this, now we do that, but I would ask, hey, what would you like to do here? And in the other piece in Twins, it was a research project where I developed an art-based method. So it was a one-on-one, and the spectator had several pieces of clay in front of them on a table, and they would translate their bodily experience into these clay pieces. And it was very, very fast. So you can imagine a dark space around you, and you have this table, and you know, okay, I have these clay pieces, and whenever the light goes on a little bit, and you can see 10 seconds of a movement that is neither completely abstract, so that probably reminds you of something, but also it's not concrete in a way that you would see someone drinking a glass of water. So the spectator had this clay in their hands, and they would form the clay in these 10 seconds. And it's really, really fast when you don't see anything. You have a soundscape, and you respond to the light, and you also, as a spectator, you feel this responsibility of going through the clay pieces one by one. And I had in total, I had about over 100 spectators forming these clay pieces, and in a separate room I would display these clay pieces. So actually the spectators' experience would create a second visual installation of their experience. And I think this is also has to do with ecology, when you show what happens with someone, and when you show what happens with what happens after that with these clay pieces, it opens up the whole piece in a way that it's not start end, but it's kind of, okay, we go into this room and then you go into that room and then something happens, it becomes more smooth.
Yeah, and it's almost like it expands the idea of time and space. Oh, success.
So what does ecoscenography mean to you?
Well, for me, it's the only, for me, it's the place where I'm at peace to continue do theater somehow, because the way I approach space and materials and the world in general is so, it's not framed, and it's not, I need to have some kind of connection with the materials I'm using, or the people I meet along the way. I had a mentor at some point who told me, you can cheat, but don't lie. And that's for me theater. I don't like the idea of lying to a public, like to do a set that is going to be super realistic or grandiose, or ecoscenography brought me to the essential of things that we're not used to see on stage. And you were talking about make the unloved space seen, and it's the same. It's really to show the corners or the thing that we didn't realize that were there all along the way. And theater for me sometimes is all about, as a scenographer, most of the time you're asked to build walls, put doors and tables, and for me all these elements symbolically also are problematic. I have a problem raising walls in theaters. If they can't be crossed to or broken, or I can't do them. I can't. Yeah, there was something about doors also. I really dislike having doors. And
I kind of hate furniture. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying.
And most of the time directors, and it's all about the needs. I need this and I need that, and you're like, well, what about the big picture? What does it relate to? And so I ended up making a project a year ago in the New Brunswick in Canada, and it was a set about the Acadian deportation. And we had a budget, and it was a very well-funded project, but I decided to use the territorial reality and community thing around the theater, really expand and I've there's a very big population of sailormen. They sail fish, they they sell lobsters and stuff like this. So I ended up gathering from all these people around ropes, fishing ropes, and I've built during 3 months with a production team and everything. We built a wall of fishing ropes that we painted in white. It was like
beautiful.
50 feet wide on 20 feet high. And for me, the gesture of putting these ropes in the white paint was a way of erasing the memory of these people who were deported back then. So it was something very symbolic even in the work the people did in gathering the ropes, cutting them, and then putting them in the... So there was something so charged in the space that it wasn't just about go and see a show with that big wall with projection on it. It was really like something with way more... it was... there was something like beyond just plywood painted for a purpose of a production. So ecoscenography for me is really a way to bring to life something beyond the material, but also the story and yeah. Before I arrived to the academia, I had a project that lasted almost 4 years, and it was called Vivarium. It was a collaboration with chercheuses and
No, I can't. You sounded like a robot. I don't know what happened.
Oh.
Can you say it again, please?
Yes. So I worked on a piece for about 4 years, and it was with my 2 friend dancers, Paige Kelly and Lucy May, and the composer Patrick Conan. And for 4 years, we did a piece that was in situ. And by making that piece, I realized a lot of... for me, it's like I realized a lot of what I was trying to do back then, but I was really interested about changing my way of working with space and materials. So I took on myself to, each time I would do the performance, I would show myself as a scenographer, which was usually we are hidden as designers, you know, we just show our work. And but that time I was like, I'm gonna perform a scenography in the making. And then the first time we did it, the struggle I had with myself was to not plan anything and just be on the side and do whatever makes sense. And I had ideas. I knew that I wanted to... It was like it was in an alleyway. It was a small space where people would go, probably, you know, have drugs and maybe sex. And it was very like, you know, in French we say délaissé, like nobody took care of that space. And it was surrounded by houses and people of the neighborhood. So when we arrived there, the first thing we did, it was to embellish it, to clean it, and to plant flowers and, you know, make it beautiful. And then people came to see us, and I was planting the flowers, and I was just playing around with the soil, and my friends were dancing on the sounds. So we did that beautiful piece. And after we had a big moment of, is art only about making stuff beautiful, or is it about, isn't it some kind of, I mean, the word is very big, but isn't it a kind of colonisation? You know, it's like colonization. And is it really like, is it our role to gentrify? And, you know, so then all these thoughts came around, and I continued working with whatever the space would give me, without putting anything from outside that wouldn't make sense. And then the piece just grew, and we performed it like several times, and each time it would be different. At some point, I gathered plants from people's gardens in Montreal for 2 months, and by the spring, they would start to flourish in my house. And the idea was to bring all these different sites into the same sites, and the plants stayed there after I left. So it continued growing, and eventually I stopped being into plants because we entered the theater, and that was the other challenge: how to bring ecology, like how to work on ecology inside the theater. And then it became about people and how you interact with technicians, how you bring ecological thinking inside an institution who is so used to work in some ways where everyone has his own role, and trying to use these to make an ecosystem that the public is not
the project that you said with the street really reminds me of the tree house that I built, which was also I was very inspired by Kiku's book on Kiku and what was it? Anyways, Kiku's book on ecology in theater. There were lots of examples, and one of the examples was by Belgian theater maker Benjamin Verdonk, who had made, I don't know if it is a piece, but he had made this manifesto about environmentalism and how you should or you have to implement it in theater. For example, there was an example on you shouldn't fly, and it was in a very humorous way it was written, and all of these kind of things about traveling and the material that are quite obvious. Everyone, I think, in the theater branch knows it. It's not something like, oh, I have never thought about this, but everyone thinks it's not possible. And Benjamin Verdonk is a theater maker who creates a lot with recycled stuff, and he also creates a lot of performative installations in the open space, in the public space, where everyone can see also the process. So I was very inspired by also this idea of showing the process, like showing, okay, I take this material, then I put it here, it's gonna be there for 10 days, and then I take it down, and then it goes somewhere else. And then ecology became for me, when I built the tree house, it was very important for me to know where the material comes from, and to not just go to a store, buy some wood and pretend, oh yes, it's ecological because it's wood, can't you see? No, I took a whole tree which was cut in pieces, which I think is already quite different to wood. For example, in Finnish we have the same word for wood and tree.
How do you say it in Finnish?
Puu.
Okay.
Yes. So it already connected more, and in English you have two different words for it, which is maybe something to think about. Anyways, I had this whole tree which was dead and cut into pieces from a city where I worked, and then the exhibition was in a different city, so I transported this dead tree to a living tree in a different city, and I felt like I'm kind of collaborating with these materials. It's not only me, I put these things here and then I'm done, but I it was a long street with a lot of huge platanus trees, and I chose one, and then I thought about it in a way that I put this dead tree onto a living tree, and then I'm also gonna be on top of the dead tree. So there's a platform made from a tree, in a tree, and I'm there as well. And my idea was to show this process. So it was, I did some preparations in the wood workshop, but I really wanted the people to see the process of putting it up. Mm-hmm. I wanted to include people into the process. So next to the street, there was this complex with workshops, with a restaurant, with a theater, with an exhibition space. So I asked people to help me from the exhibition space, people that also exhibited there, and from the workshops which were there. So the idea was not only to create attention for the spectators who would walk by, who didn't know they were spectators, mm-hmm. but also for the people who were there, to create this idea of, hey, I could also put something onto a tree. This is possible. It's in the public space, and yeah, I could also do something that is not expected. And I think this kind of grasping possibilities that you might not notice every day when you walk by. This was a very busy street. Everyone would walk to the station there, and to kind of just plant this idea of, hey, you can do something. Why not look at public space or your own space in a way like, what could I do I haven't thought of? And I think that this that is very in line with environmentalist thinking as well, because we all think that it's so huge, it's so big, we can't do it. We are so used to our routines, but sometimes there is like just one thing that you can do, one thing that you can change. Maybe it's just these 10, but still you have there's something, and it has an effect on others again. I don't know if this makes any sense what I'm saying. I hope so.
It does. Yeah.
I feel a lot of pressure because I know this is being recorded.
Oh, well,
Okay. I suppose that lots of people who are watching this are familiar with theater productions and might even create themselves something. And because of the ongoing environmental discussion, I think everyone has thought about how to include ecology in their own practice. My question to you would be, what is not ecology?
Interesting. Thank you.
Often it's easy, no worries. Often it's easier to define something or answer something when you say, what is it not?
True.
Because those might be easier to say. What can I not do?
It's interesting because I had my question was what is not ecology?
So it's the same.
Yeah.
Amazing. I thought.
Cool.
That's so interesting. You know what I would answer to that? What is not ecology? I would say nothing is not ecology.
Okay, cool.
me, everything is ecology. If you think, it depends how you define ecology. If you define it in a very scientific way, maybe then you're focused on natural elements and nature. But we're actually, if we think about ecology being a relational system where everything is connected and understanding those connections, there's no such thing as no ecology.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. That's yeah.
We are part of the ecology, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. It's happening right now, within us, outside us, with us. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. Wow.
So it's a nice question, because I really had to think. What is not ecology? And then there's no not ecology.
Okay.
I think the problem is that the problem with our environmental crisis is that we've probably failed to see that there's no ecology. There's no ecology. Does that make sense? No, that's quite confusing. There's lots of negatives in that. What I mean by that is that we failed to see how ecology is everything. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That everything is interconnected.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's part of the problem with the world right now, is we failed to understand that. And we failed to understand that us polluting, let's just say us polluting the ocean with throwing a piece of plastic in the ocean and maybe not even realize that we're doing it, that all comes back to us, because we know that the fish eat the plastic and then we eat the fish. So it all comes back, that's just one little example of how this sort of network is so intertwined.
Yeah.
With many examples.
So to come back to ecoscenography, it's the same idea of whatever you create comes back to you in the symbolic way and the materialistic way.
I love that. I love that definition. That's really lovely. Everything that you create comes back to you in some way or another. I think that's such a good way to think about it. For me, ecoscenography is about bringing ecological thinking into the design process, and ecological thinking is relational thinking, which we've discussed here today, interconnected thinking. It's acknowledging those networks that we're part of, that acknowledgement that our practices have consequences, that there is no such thing as a way, that everything is super intertwined. And we can't disconnect ourselves from those networks that we're part of. And so how do we design in a way that acknowledges that? So